Hello, everybody. This is Chuck Tommey with Hillstrong Group Security, and just wanted to say thanks for stopping by here. This is a talk that I recently gave at an ISSA meeting. That's the Information Systems and Security Association. It's a organization that has chapters around the country and around the world that are really more IT focused. So this was a talk that was really focusing on operational technology, or OT. We'll get into more of what that means if you're not familiar as we go through the presentation. But really had some good conversations, so I thought it would be worthwhile to do a post meeting recording of this presentation and put it out there for folks that might be interested in that OT, cybersecurity, and governance piece. So let's start off with what is OT or ICS or IIoT. We kind of lump that together. OT stands for operational technology. Um, you know, the definition that I use a lot is anything that looks, sounds, feels, smells, or tastes like IT, and it interacts with or helps control something in the physical world. That can be anything from the simple side of measurement, or maybe indicating what's going on in a process, so you can tell kind of what phase it's in, or if there's anything going wrong with it, to the actual control of those processes, right? Something like a chemical plant, or even something closer to home, like HVAC, controlling the temperature in a building. So lots of stuff that we may or may not think of on a normal everyday basis as being operational technology, or could be included there, but that ICS, industrial control system, or industrial Internet of Things, is that IIoT. So kind of where does that bring us to who is typically responsible for those OT cyber assets that are out there, right? And ensuring that there is some kind of management of those OT assets from a cyber perspective. And I got a lot of kind of blank stares at the meeting of IT folks mainly. I did have a few brave souls raise their hand. But really, this was a bit of a trick question, really, because just as it is with cybersecurity in all flavors, as far as I'm concerned, and most people in cyber now agree with this, is that really everybody has to feel responsible for their part in keeping uh, systems secure, making sure that we're not doing things on our laptops, on our cell phones, that might give some nefarious folks a step into our systems. Right? We want to keep everything as secure as possible. So everybody needs to be responsible, and that is now really important when we're thinking about management within an organization or a large company. Right? Is that we really need to make sure that somebody is specifically designated as the responsible person for OT cyber. There may be somebody that's the cybersecurity person, but a lot of times that's really focused on the IT side, and they're not really thinking about the OT side. So we need to make sure that somebody knows that they are responsible for OT cyber. So the rest of the talk, we're going to really look at, where is OT or ICS or IIoT often found in a organization or a company, from a physically, where does it exist? Where do you find it? And what does it look like to some degree? And then we're going to really dive down and look at why is it different than IT? Why do we even have a OT versus IT discussion? And that's really important because there are differences, and a lot of those differences will lead to managing it differently. Um, and then that leads to why this OT governance gap exists, right? A lot of organizations have a pretty good handle on IT cybersecurity at this point, but when it gets into the OT side, there's a lot of ambiguity, or just less maturity in the way that they handle managing cyber on the OT side. So that'll lead us into, okay, now we know that there's a gap. How do we close that gap? And there's a lot of really good guidance out there that is specific for OT organizationally. Like, a lot of times this is uh, being managed already. Those devices or assets are owned by the chief operations officer or the VP of manufacturing or something like that. So it's a different organization typically that may own those assets. So it needs to be managed with that in mind, right? We can't just go in there with IT policies and processes and expect them to work well. And then finally, we'll talk about some lessons learned. I've been getting some gray hair lately. It just means that I've been around for a while, so I do have a few lessons that I've learned from working in the field. So I wanted to pass on some of those. So where does OT exist? Well, we already mentioned this one, but a lot of people don't think of it as OT, but it definitely falls in that category of controlling and interacting with the physical world. So that those HVA systems, which there are very, very few buildings left in the world, and especially in the U.S., that don't have HVAC. So that's a big one. Another one that we're starting to see almost everywhere is some kind of physical access control for buildings, whether it's a card reader or some other form of control. But keeping folks out of areas that they don't have authorization to be in is become a very important thing that we're doing these days. Other things for efficiency or ability to control, building lighting systems. We really have taken that to the new level and making sure that only lights are on that are needed. If there's people in the area on certain days, might even start turning out lights if there's enough sunlight outside, so we're not using extra energy. So lighting control systems is another place that we'll see OT or IIoT. And then, elevator controls. That's a common one that most people don't even think about. But there's a little computer, PLC, something in there that's running those elevators. And, these days with some of the tall buildings, that can get pretty complicated. There's a lot of logic that goes on there to ensure that, they're running as efficiently and as speedily as possible. And then finally, another one that is huge that a lot of people don't think about is logistics. Whether those are sorting centers, for the package companies, or almost every manufacturer has some area within the plant or the process where they are transferring. Whether they're packaged or bulk, they're still transferring materials either into or out of a facility, and that's logistics. And there's often, even if it's as simple as reading barcodes to keep track of inventory, but there may be conveyor systems, there may be piping systems, transferring bulk goods in and out. So a lot of times, logistics is another area that we don't think of a lot as being OT or operational technology. So one of the things, that's really interesting, in my opinion, is that we've really seen a lot of attacks on the IT infrastructure that may have originated on the OT side. And it goes both ways. We've also seen a lot of the opposite, where IT allows attacks on the OT side. But Target's probably one of the most famous ones, and one of the earliest ones that got a lot of attention, where 40 million credit cards were compromised, credit card numbers, because an HVA system supplier or service supplier didn't have great security on their end, got breached, but they had a constant connection into Target's systems, and that system then had access to all the stores, and there was no segregation between the HVAC network connection and the connection for the point of sale terminals. So they were able to get into the point of sale terminals through that HVAC supplier's connection and compromise 40 million credit cards. So that was huge. We've had Ukraine get their lights turned off in Kiev and other areas by the Russians. That's was some of the early indications that things were not going well between the two. But that happened back in 2015 and then again in 2016. So they knew that it had happened once. They thought that they had taken care of the risks, but a year later they were able to. The adversaries were able to get back in and do this essentially the same thing. So that just tells you that there may be some differences on the OT side. There may be some things that we think are required to operate OT things that are inherently less secure. I'm not sure that that's really the case, but that may be some people's way of thinking. And it may be that you have to think a little differently than IT, but it doesn't mean that it can't be secured. Another favorite of mine is the fish tank at the casino that was used as a stepping stone, as a waypoint on the way to getting access into the rest of the network. The best explanation I've heard of this is that it actually had both it had a wireless connection into the corporate network for monitoring, but that wireless connection was not very well secure. So they were able to get in and use and then own the fish tank temperature monitor and then use that to get into the corporate network. And then they were able to get access to some sensitive files and exfiltrate those. Some things more recent memory that had maybe larger impact. If we can think of the Colonial Pipeline that was shut down in 2021, that actually fed my part of the country, the Southeast, all the way from Texas, Louisiana area up through the deep South. We'll say it terminates in the Charlotte area, and Atlanta, Charlotte, Raleigh, a lot of places in the South couldn't get gasoline for about 2 weeks. And it took maybe another week or two after that even to get it back to normal. So it was kind of a inconvenient month there where people all of a sudden were trying to stay home as much as possible so that they didn't have to drive and they weren't using gasoline that they didn't know if they were going to be able to replace anytime soon. And then another more recent one is the MGM Resorts. And this, again, goes back to what is OT, what is IT. I think a lot of this, door locks and those kind of things in a hotel are typically just treated as IT assets. But in this case, when IT got shut down with a ransomware attack, now all of a sudden, none of the guests could get in their rooms because the attackers were able to shut down the key card reading system for all the doors in the hotel. And the hotels out in Vegas, they have thousands of rooms. So now you had folks going around and trying to manually help guests get into their rooms in thousands of cases across multiple hotels. Actually, MGM was not just one hotel. So these are some big wake up calls that we've seen over the years that OT needs to be treated as a security issue, but yet may need to be treated differently than IT. And okay, one more quick run through here of recent stories. We talked about MGM Resorts. Bridgestone is even more recent. So that's, they were able to shut down a tire manufacturing facility, actually multiple facilities. And then when I was giving this talk in early November of 2025, the Jaguar Land Rover was still coming up from having been down for over a month. And they were looking at probably being down for a couple more weeks in some locations. So we had 6, 7, 8 weeks of disruption in a lot of their production facilities and even led the British government, because it's a major employer in Britain. They had to come up with a $1.5 billion loan guarantee so that Jaguar Land Rover could pay their suppliers and get the whole system back up and running, because they hadn't been able to pay the suppliers, so they couldn't even get new raw materials to start the lines back up after they had patched the systems and brought them back online. So a little bit of an eye chart here maybe, but this is more details on why OT is different than IT. IT and OT being separate sides of the same coin in a lot of ways, but still different. In the IT world, we're really talking about everything happening in digital. Excuse me. Everything happening in the digital world, in a server, on a network. But OT, that the big difference is we're really dealing with physical, either values or physical control of machinery, or even processes like door locks or lighting, those kinds of things, right? And so it really can have an outsized impact, especially on a firm that is a manufacturing firm. That's how they make their money, is with those physical processes. But even on a firm that maybe doesn't have any kind of manufacturing, where OT is typically really well known. But if you shut down, the HVAC in the middle of summer in the south of the U.S., there's not going to be many people happy doing their jobs when it's 100 degrees in a building. Same thing in the winter up north. If you shut down HVAC and it gets freezing cold in a building, your productivity's probably going to go way down. So there's a lot of impacts on the business that may not be immediately obvious, right? Then we have the priorities between IT and OT. IT typically has really been focused on confidentiality. When you think of the CIA triad, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, they're really looking at that confidentiality. Totally normal, because that's what all the regulators have been emphasizing for them for over the last years. Credit card, personally identifiable information, HIPAA laws, all that is about data confidentiality. But on the OT side, we're really about safety and availability of the manufacturing process, because that's how those companies are making their money, right? And so we really want to make sure that we're safe, that our people are safe, that our communities are safe, both, from an environmental perspective, from any other kind of, potential hazard that could be aggravated if a manufacturing process or a chemical process is not kept under control. Could be some bad things happen. So we really focus on that safety and availability on the OT side. How they even report up, through the organization is different all the way till you get to the top, usually to that C-suite. The IT folks would go up through that CISO and CIO typically, when they're sitting at the C-suite level. And then the operational side is typically up through VP of manufacturing, like I said earlier, or maybe the COO, or chief operations officer. They work differently, right? Typically, we say IT works in the carpeted side of the house, in a nice office building. Typically, not always. I get some of them work in harder conditions, but the vast majority of them are working 8 to 5, or on a normal weekday shift. Whereas on the OT side, it's 24/7, 365, rotating shifts. Sometimes it's the operations are running at night, weekends and holidays. And so it's a different level of SLA, right? You've got to be ready to respond as quickly as possible, 24/7, 365. And even, it's a little bit more mixed these days, but there still is a typical divide of, folks went to college for computer science or got a bunch of IT type certificates, right? And that's the folks working in IT and in cyber on the IT side. Whereas on the OT side, it's usually engineering or maybe some of the math and science folks that are working in that OT world, and so they weren't even a lot of times in the same school. If they went to the same college or university, they might not have been in the same school, and they were trained differently in a lot of cases. So just top to bottom, very different. And then again, just emphasizing that the risks on the OT cyber side are, that safety level, that availability of the means of production, which is the lifeblood of, a manufacturing process company. If you shut that down, you really can, put a lot of pressure on the board to pay a ransom. So that's a very enticing target for the ransomware gangs out there. And then also the not just downtime, but what if they actually are able to do something to cause damage to the means of production or cause a release of some environmentally bad chemicals or just wastewater into areas where it's not supposed to be. So there's things that could happen if they were able to take control of those physical controls, right? That are a little bit different level of impact than just taking over an email server or a web page. So then, what does that mean, right? Where does that get us? Well, typically what we've seen is that on the IT side, they've got their policies and procedures in place, a governance program for cybersecurity, for the general operations of the IT systems, right? On the OT side, a lot of times there is a lot of governance around the process and how we manufacture something, because we have to do it in a quality way. But what's been left out is that whole cyber piece. There was a long time period when it wasn't thought to be important, or it might not have been important because the systems weren't connected. They weren't as important to the process, to the quality of the product. And so that OT cyber side just was never developed. Well, now we have to do that because they are so connected and they are so important to getting high quality and high productivity through the plant, that those IT-like systems, the OT systems, are essential. And so we have to protect them just like we would from a safety perspective. We don't want anybody getting hurt and causing downtime. We don't want anything to happen that's going to cause downtime. And so we really have to think a little bit differently now and really think about how do we govern that OT set of equipment in a more systematic way, right? So what we have seen, which it doesn't always work very well, is IT being told to go help their OT brothers and sisters, right? You guys got it kind of figured out on the IT side. Why don't you go help the OT folks get up to speed? And most of the time, the IT folks are like, "Yeah, we'll go help. Let's go do it." But what they may not understand is the differences, again, between OT and IT, and the need to think about those differences and to build that into the policy. So what we've seen that does not work a lot of times is to just bring those OT policies and processes over to and try to make them fit in the OT world. Things like patching, which is a bedrock of IT cybersecurity, right? You got to keep things patched and up to date so that you don't fall victim to things that could have been avoided by being up to date. Well, on the OT side, you may have to plan as far as a year or even 18 months out to be able to take a piece of equipment down and make the patch. So that causes two things. One, your patching program has to be different. And the metrics around how you track whether or not you're being effective have to be different. But also, you may need to architect your systems in a way that allow you to do compensating controls around systems that you might not have had to do if you could patch them on a very quick uh, expeditious basis. So now you got to look at different metrics. You got to look at different processes, scheduling to make sure that you're taking into account downtimes and when those systems are available. Because if you take it down to make a patch, um, then that's causing an availability issue. So you're it's like a denial of service, of your own making for the operational guys, and can't be doing that. And then again, you got to think about how you're interacting with that different level of, or different layer or silo of management that is that operation side of the house. So lots of things here. Again, we've already talked about metrics. KPIs are similar. How are you making sure that you're measuring that your program is effective, including OT specifics in IT playbooks, or creating OT specific playbooks that may not even have an IT equivalent. Patching certain industrial processes may be a separate playbook. Responding to an incident in an OT environment may be a separate playbook than what it is on the IT side. They may start similarly, but a lot of the how are you going to kind of shut down and make sure that you're containing a breach will likely be different on the OT side than it would have been on the IT side. How do you ensure that everything has been cleaned up and is ready to go back online? What do you do once the systems are ready to go back online? You got to go through all kinds of additional checks typically on the OT side. You got to get back up to speed, physical speed of production, as well as making sure that the quality is coming up as fast as the line is coming up. There's all kinds of things to be considered in addition to just the systems working and being ready to work and being clean from some kind of infection or breach. And so this leads to, since they can be so different, we need to really be making sure we're working together anytime that there's training or exercises that we're doing to test our cybersecurity capabilities or response capabilities. We've got to be including the OT folks and the OT systems in those exercises. We talked about silos just a little bit ago, and that's really a big issue. Sometimes we've seen it a lot be an issue because, again, the CIO has their marching orders from the board or from the CEO, and the COO has their orders. And sometimes it's hard to see how they fit together when we're talking cybersecurity. They do, and there is a way to help folks see that they're helping each other by reaching across and breaking down those silos. But it takes communication. It takes time. It takes effort. And then there's the downstream effects of those different silos. Again, differences in recovery time, how you're going to measure the readiness of the two areas to respond to a cyber attack, and then what are the impacts of a cyber attack between the two. No doubt that IT's systems going down can be devastating and can be very problematic. Billing systems, invoicing, payment systems that can really cripple a company. But if you're making money by producing something, and now all your configurations and programs for controlling those processes have been wiped out, or even worse, have been changed in ways that you don't know how they've been changed, and are making bad product, that can take a long time to recover from. And if you can't make product that's sellable during that time, you've got raw materials, you've got energy bills that you're paying that are not making money for the company, and that can cause serious issues. Many companies have actually gone out of business after a serious cyber attack. They're mainly smaller ones that don't have the additional plants to keep running or keep them up and financially stable, or they're just not big enough to get a good loan to see them through. So they may be a small mom and pop, and they don't have the financial backing. So a major cyber event can just cause them so much additional labor and consulting fees and all that it just is impossible to recover from. So we don't want that to happen. So what do we do? Well, the good thing is there are tons, and quite literally, probably if you stack these things all up, there probably is a ton of standards and frameworks and maturity models that have been built specifically for OT, or sometimes they've taken the IT and adapted it, for OT. The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, the CMMC, is a pretty big one the DoD is using. It's not specifically for OT. It applies to IT also, but a lot of what the DoD is trying to protect is OT systems too. So there's a lot of OT in it. The Cybersecurity Capability Maturity Model, that's another one that is more kind of critical infrastructure focused. So again, OT focused. It was created by the Department of Energy, so that kind of makes sense of why it's OT focused. There's a whole series, a standard series 62443. There's about, now 14, 15, 16 different standards within that series that are all OT cybersecurity related standards. Everything from, how do you design a system? How do you assess a system? How do you manage a system? And from a cyber perspective. And so this is a great one to really dig into because it was specifically created, all of it, around operational technology or industrial control systems. And then the U.S., the NIST, has taken on this call, and this 800-82. Many folks are familiar with 800-53, which was the original U.S. government cybersecurity standards out there. Well, they took those and they adapted them to the OT side, and so they came out with this 82, and they're in release 3 now. So it's been around for quite a while and has a lot of runtime on it. All these standards have been around for quite a while and have a lot of good lessons learned built into them. And then, the NIST has also a whole cybersecurity framework. Not the 800-82 is really focused on control systems and what are the specific controls that can be implemented. Whereas the framework is more about how do you manage the system, right? From a full process, governing, identifying, protecting, detecting, responding, and recovering from incidents. So it's really a process of management. And this is kind of that overview again. So I think we talked about all of these. Don't need to go into detail. So let's start talking about a little bit more from the lessons learned. I've mentioned a few of these as we've gone along. The kind of overarching themes here are that, what we've seen is a lot of times that IT has taken this hands-off approach because at some point in the past, there may have been a disagreement. IT may have been told to go help OT, but OT felt like IT was, overstepping their bounds or trying to implement things that didn't work. And that does happen. And so IT might have said, okay, fine. If you want to go do your own thing, fine. We're just going to put this firewall here between our two networks, and we're only going to let, specific things across once we know what it is so that you can't affect us. And that worked for a while, but now we've got the bad guys have gotten too smart, and they know how to get through those firewalls, and they know how to go from either side. They know how to go from the IT side and get to the OT, and they know how to start on the OT side and get into the IT. So, that firewall oftentimes was not well managed. It wasn't looked at very often. Might not over the years have even been operating as a firewall anymore, with all the allow rules that may have been put in, allow all, when they're troubleshooting and never removed. So that doesn't work anymore. We have to have collaboration between IT and OT. Then we've got, again, this is kind of the same idea said a little bit differently, but we can't treat OT like IT. We got to be specific in using techniques and controls even that work in the OT world. Some of the problems are that we've got old equipment in the OT world, and so we can't run antivirus, and we can't run endpoint management tools on every endpoint. That just may not be compatible, or the controller may not have enough processing power or enough network throughput to handle those applications. So we got to architect the systems with different compensating controls to make sure that we're still keeping it safe, but we're not causing issues with the actual production. And then we talked about this incident response. I've seen many times where, even if they're trying to implement some cyber controls on the OT side, they may not have any planning around how are we going to respond once we do detect a problem, right? A breach or a ransomware, even. What's the playbook going to look like? And I think I've only seen 2 companies in the last 5 or 10 years that I've been going in and talking to them that had OT specific playbooks ready to go. It's been a very rare occasion, and that's true today. In 2025, I still talk to large companies in the billions of dollars of revenue that have no cybersecurity for OT from a response planning. It's well, we'll just call IT, and again, IT doesn't necessarily know what to do differently in an OT incident versus an IT. And then another one is, IT's gotten very good in the last several years about, vetting their vendors and their suppliers and making sure that they have cybersecurity programs in place, and that they're have less likelihood of causing an issue with devices and programming and connections that they may have into the IT systems. But that same level of vetting has not happened typically on the OT side. And there's maybe more integration there with vendors, everything from just-in-time inventory control to wastewater management to environmental licensing, where you have to monitor air that's being discharged or water that's being discharged. And if you don't have those records, then you can get fined significantly. And if somebody gets in and deletes all your files on your file server where all that data was, and you don't have a backup or a way to get to that backup data, then you could get fined. So there's a lot of reasons why we can't do OT like we've done IT. So now, if we got folks, okay, we want to the point where they realize OT is different, OT is a concern, we really need to get something going. How do we really get a OT specific, or even, this will work if you take an IT program and just enlarge it to include OT. There still has to be OT specifics involved, though, right? And so how do you get that going? Well, number one, you're going to need senior sponsorship. And, whether it's the C-suite or the level below that, it works typically best if it's the C-suite or even the board that's requiring this. That really helps free up some budget money to pay for things. But, at that C-suite is really the sweet spot, because they have their finger on the pulse of what's happening, and they have access to budgets, so they can make that determination of what's priority this year. The other thing is really getting IT and OT to talk to each other, helping OT understand cyber issues, because a lot of times they've never been focused on that, so they may not really understand it. So IT can be very helpful with that. They can be helpful on a lot of different areas, process, policy, procedure, um, helping them figure out what that looks like. But again, they really need to be open to understanding what the additional requirements or limitations might be within the OT world, so that they can adjust and adapt their IT processes and policies to the OT world. Really taking this from a risk-based perspective, it makes sense. Sometimes in the past, IT's really gotten on the compliance bandwagon, and they've spent a lot of time just trying to comply to specific regulations or standards. And understandable in the past that was done, because they were learning their way through. But we've really figured out, I think, over the last 10 to 15 years, that it needs to be risk-based. The standards and regulations are there, and they can be very helpful, but we can't just blindly apply a standard or even a regulation. We need to make sure that we're looking at it from a risk base. How are we reducing risk within the OT environment when we are applying these standards and regulations? And that leads to better use of capital investment, better ease of management, and better response to incidents, if we're figuring out how to do all these things based on what's the most risk. And then, of course, a healthy dose of change management. How do we manage this? This is a lot of new stuff for a lot of people, both on the IT and the OT side. There's going to be doing a lot of new things, and they're having to work with people they may have not have worked very closely with in the past. So really managing that change and helping people work together is crucial. So thinking about this not just from a technology, I'm going to buy this piece of software, or even I'm going to pull in this consulting group, although that could be very helpful. But thinking about it from that whole people, process, and technology perspective, and what is going to make the most have the most effect on reducing risk. So a couple quick kind of case studies here, if you will. Recently, Hillstrong was engaged with a chemical manufacturer, good size company, over $2 billion in annual revenue, over 20 sites across the globe, four continents, and they'd kind of come to us because they'd seen a bunch of their competitors or peers in the chemical industry have issues. People might have heard of Clorox having issues recently. They might have heard of, there's been multiples. But so they're trying to get, a handle on it. Newer CIO, newer person that had been told that they were responsible for OT cybersecurity, but had never done OT before. So this is a classic case, right? They are trying to figure out what to do, trying to do the right thing, but just really didn't know what they were getting into in some cases. So some of the things that worked really well were, the CIO and the CISO, or what was essentially a CISO, and the engineering teams were all talking well together. They all agreed that this was something that needed to happen. They had started down the path of creating OT specific policies. We helped them move that a lot further down the line, further towards completion. And they had already had some folks that were doing some good work, but it just wasn't documented well, and it wasn't done in a way that might be easy to manage over time and to expand and to get implemented across their fleet of plants. It was being done in 2 or 3 plants, but by a single person. That needed to be documented and made the way to for other plants to understand what they had done and how to do it well and how to implement it easily. What didn't work well was, again, we had budget issues where their manufacturer We've got all this tariff issues and economic issues that a lot of uncertainty. So getting budget was difficult. They had actually defined a very robust cybersecurity um, kind of base for new plants and new control systems going into existing plants. Anytime that they were going to upgrade a plant, they were supposed to use this architecture. Well, when it came down to it, if they didn't have the budget or they thought the budget was tight, then what's the first thing to go? Well, we don't need to do all this virtualization, which makes backup and management easier. We don't need to have dual servers or dual firewalls so that we can upgrade one while we're leave the other in place. So that really cuts down on your ability to keep a system up to date and secure. So they value engineered that out to save costs, but that just showed that there wasn't a commitment, at the higher levels to spend the money that's required to stay, as secure as possible, or at least to some level of security that they've declared that they want to maintain. Also, 22 sites, was really hard to manage all those sites across multiple regions. So what we help them understand is, there's folks that are probably already doing some cybersecurity in every plant or every region, just because they know it's the right thing to do. Just like we found one person in the U.S. that was doing a lot around this. There are people in other regions that know that it needs to be done and are trying to do some things. So make those your champions, right? And officially kind of give them that title. And then, if you can swing it, we recommend giving them some kind of bonus or upgrade to their title to include cybersecurity. And that way, one, you've got designated people that to go to. They know that it's now part of their job. And if you can swing the bonuses or the salary increases, then they're being paid for it, and so now they really understand that is part of their job. And so that's something that can be done for very little money. It's not like having to hire one person per plant. You're just upping their pay or giving them bonuses based on additional work that they're doing, right? And then figuring out ways to monitor those sites, and that it's may not require a lot of additional software or time or whatever. There's ways that we can do some monitoring, and maybe that's tying it into the IT side where they're already doing monitoring at those sites. They're just not monitoring the OT side. So figuring out ways that they can help and do that in a way that's not disruptive or doesn't decrease the security, right? So that's one site. Another one that we've been working with is a grid scale battery OEM. So these are the huge batteries out there where they're if there's a blackout or if there's a high demand in the certain time of year, summertime for air conditioning, morning and evening heating, residential heating in the wintertime. A lot of these grid scale batteries are now taking that load on and keeping the grid from having blackouts. And so they've become critical. And so this company is supplying those battery systems all across the world. And they are also supplying services, monitoring services for those systems, monitoring and maintenance. And so they're interacting. They're in that case, they're selling it, but they're also become like a third party supplier to the grid operators or the generation folks that are buying these battery systems and become the owner operators. And so they really needed to figure out how they were going to do that monitoring and remote diagnostics securely. They were trying already. They had a lot of good things in place, VPNs and but they didn't have any OT specific policies or processes. So that's what we helped them do, right? Write those policies. We worked, a lot with the IT side, what policies are existing from a cyber perspective, can we just insert some things into those policies to include the OT, or is it different enough on the OT side? There were a few where we had to write a brand new policy. And the same thing on the process side. Can we enhance an existing process to make it make sense in the OT world, or do we just need to write a new process? And I think we wrote 12 brand new complete process documents. There may be a few more that need to be written, but the big thing we had to do there was make sure that a bunch of these silos were all de-siloed and started working together. We had product development, we had a product security team, we had the monitoring folks that were based in India, and we have the actual customer service organization. And so all those folks, and then cybersecurity as a whole. So we had a lot of folks that we had to, help see each other's, kind of needs and why they were doing things the way they were, but what made sense as a whole for the company. So that was another really interesting engagement. So kind of key takeaways here. OT is, all around us, right? We talked about at the beginning. It could be HVAC in a building. It could be, access controls, physical access controls. Could be elevator. Could be logistics, a big one that we don't think of a lot of times. Conveyor systems. Robots now are picking and packing and moving pallets around in these warehouses. So it can be a lot of different places in addition to the factory or the process plant, right? What are those risks, right? In OT, in some ways, it can be a bigger risk to the existence of the company, right? An existential risk to the company if we're not thinking about those OT, requirements and addressing them in a way that makes sense for the OT. We don't want to create our own denial of service attack on our own means of production, right? As a company, just because we're trying to get more secure. Governance, huge piece of this, right, is writing those policies, writing those processes, making sure you get all the stakeholder input so that as you're writing those, that they make sense and that they can be implemented as written. So you don't have people having to go around the rules to make product or go around the rules to keep things secure. You want to make sure that the rules make sense for both, the purpose and mission of the company, making something and selling it to customers, but also keeping them secure. There's tons of that guidance out there that is OT specific. It's been built over the years. There's a lot of good lessons learned already built into those standards and maturity models, and learn from that. Try to talk to your peers from an OT perspective. If maybe the IT folks are still taking care of the HVAC systems and the other OT systems that have been IT controlled for a long time, but what are they doing different? How are they handling that separate from what may be more traditional IT servers and web servers and email servers? And then making sure that the IT and OT teams are working together, that they're not as siloed as they have been in the past. And one last thing that's, kind of a hidden threat out there is a lot of times we find these dependencies on the IT side for OT systems, but they're not really they don't look like OT and they haven't been treated as OT in the past. So things like, the access control comes under that, but one of the ones that's even kind of more non-traditional is like a quality system, right? A lot of times that is hosted on an IT server somewhere. So that data is going over from the OT side back into the quality system. And, if you can't write that data, you can't record it, then you may not be able to sell the product in certain industries. You have to have that provenance to show the customer or a regulator, in the case of FDA or even the military or other folks out there, that this drug was made correctly or this device was tested properly and that it's good to be sold. If you can't show those results, then you can't sell the product. So, that dependency is one that oftentimes gets overlooked. And if somebody gets into the IT side, shuts that down, you can't run your plant, because you can't be recording and checking to make sure that you're in the right tolerances. A lot of times there's multiple levels of tolerance. So a big thing is to really take a hard look at what your OT systems or your production systems are dependent upon that may live in the IT world, and see how you may need to want to kind of carve out another area of protection within IT to keep it separate from email and web servers and those things. So anyway, those are kind of our lessons learned takeaways. Just wanted to encourage you, if you have any questions, reach out. My email is there, my phone number is there. And you can always check out our website at hillstrongsecurity.com, or we're actually building a SaaS product right now to help build and manage OT cybersecurity programs, and that's that Resilion.io link. So I'd be happy for you to go there. You can reach out if there's something on there that does look interesting to you. Again, email, phone, there's contacts on that website. So appreciate you making it through the video if you did. So hopefully we'll be able to help, or some of this may have helped you think about things a little bit differently. Thank you.